It's a difficult question, and I think it will be different for each person. But I think there is like a universal experience, which is that even if someone has a good level of English and they visit a country or they definitely move to a country like especially England, we don't speak in the English that people learn, especially if you're learning inside a classroom or if you're relying on your like school education or potentially like an academy or something like this. If you're like learning like textbook English, I'll call it, it's not how people speak in real life. There's so much slang. There's like idioms aren't really said that much, but like phrasal verbs, just like this type of like informal language which people use and context dependent and like reference dependent. It's so difficult to like keep up in conversations because you will be completely lost. Like I can assure you if like even Jose, like if he came out with some of my friends, like Jose speaks great English, he has like a really wide vocabulary, but I think that if he like came to the pub with like four of my friends, he would be fine. He would be able to understand, but like I think like every other sentence there'd be something in there which he wouldn't understand if we were speaking completely naturally as we would. Not because we would be talking about something that Jose doesn't know, but just because of the language that we use is so difficult. Like, and it's so region dependent as well. Like, I've given this example before, but there's a Netflix show called Top Boy, and it's a really good TV show if you're interested in that type of TV show. But it's about gangs and drug dealing in London, and they use a very specific type of vocabulary to the point that if my parents watched that, they would get quite lost in the dialogue quite quickly. And my dad has watched that, and then he started using a few words from it and like me and my sister were like laughing so much because it sounds so funny coming out of his voice, out of him. But like, even some of the words that I didn't know. So it's not just like the vocabulary, but it's like just the way people speak is just like completely different. And the UK is so hard because we have so many accents here that it's wild. Like I didn't think about how diverse the UK accent is. Like when people say British accent, like I want a British accent, like what do you mean? Like, and they probably mean like the Queen's English or like an RP accent. They want to sound like they're presenting the BBC. But I think it's communicating with native speakers in their natural habitats, we'll call it. And especially if you're like alone, I think that can be really difficult. And like if it's like you and a group of native speakers, especially younger people, because younger people usually have different like dialects than kind of what, older people. So like you'd still, I don't want to put anyone off because you can still communicate. Like all of you here, well, Sasha lives in the UK, but everyone here like would be able to go to the UK on holiday and communicate in restaurants and everything, like no problem. But like in an actual like friendship environment or like groups of people, it can be, yeah, very difficult. So I would probably say that, Guido, but it depends like who you are, what you find more difficult, and like the language that your native language is in. So like some people, like I'm guessing like Chinese speakers and Arabic speakers and Spanish speakers find different parts of the English language more difficult. So I think it depends on who you are, but I'd probably say communicating with native speakers in their natural habitats and adjusting to their accent. It sounds like they're speaking a completely different language. Even
Um,
and I'm saying that like from my perspective, like if I went to Glasgow and spoke to some real Glaswegians, I would be like, has anyone got a translator here? Like
yes.
I need help. Phrasal verbs are like really hard because they don't make sense logically when you read them. You know the first word, look, you know the second word, forward, you know, look, forward, but you don't know. it means like you're excited about something in the future. You can't understand it, you can't guess it unless you know what it means. I guess you could probably guess what it means from context. So like if you knew that me and you were both going to the cinema at the weekend and I could say I'm looking forward to the cinema, you could probably guess what that means, but they are pretty challenging to guess from context. I think it's the same with any other vocabulary is you just learn them naturally through input, so through listening and reading. I think they're used more in speech than they are in writing, to be honest. So probably through listening and probably to like real life conversations and also kind of like maybe like TV because they are mimicking real life conversations. And it's the same as any vocabulary, I guess. You look up what the word means, you look at the definition, you try to understand it, you store it somewhere, you might do flashcard exercises with it. But I think with phrasal verbs, the emphasis is on learning it in context and kind of putting it in as many contexts as you can. So I think the important thing is like when you do have it in a flashcard, I would not have like look forward as the thing. I'd probably have a whole sentence. So I'm looking forward to the weekend. So it's kind of, I think they're a lot easier to remember in context. And if you can just remember like one, so imagine you learn look forward as a phrasal verb and you have it in your flashcard set or your spreadsheet or however you want to store your vocabulary as I'm looking forward to the weekend. And then you're reading a book, you see look forward, and you're like, ah, what is that? If it's connected to a sentence and maybe something that's like really memorable. So I guess looking forward to the weekend is not that memorable, but if you were like, I'm looking forward to my sister's wedding or something like this, it's easier to make that connection and then you can understand it from the context. So I think it's the same as any other vocabulary. The thing with phrasal verbs is there are lists online. So I used to go through when some of my students used to want to learn phrasal verbs, I would get a list of like the 200 most common ones. And we'd go through that list kind of systematically and we'd learn them like that. So phrasal verbs, it's that. It's just practice, put them in context and like really train your ear for looking out or listening out for them when people are speaking because like the more times that you hear it, the more times you'll kind of see it and hear it in different contexts, and then your brain will develop a better understanding of how to use that because that's the thing with like slang and idioms and maybe phrasal verbs is but not as much as that like sometimes if I hear an American use British slang, it doesn't sound right and it sounds forced. And it
Mhm.
almost sounds a little bit cringy sometimes if they use it and it sounds forced. So I would actually advise people not to use too much. Like one of my students always like says like mate in a very British way. And I know he's doing it to like mock British people and it's like a bit of a joke. But like if he went to the UK and he did that seriously, like people would find it a little bit strange because it sounds forced and it doesn't sound natural. It's almost like when posh people try and use like slang from the TV show I use like Top Boy. Like if my dad was like, "Oh my God, there's feds over there," referring to the police, like people wouldn't take that seriously because like he's like an almost a 60-year-old man from a white middle class town and he's like he doesn't speak like that. So we're the more times that you hear phrasal verbs, the better you'll understand it and how to use it for different things. Tenses are horrible. I think if I went into the Manchester city centre and asked people how many tenses are there in the English language, they would say three. We have the past, we have the present, we have the future. I don't think they would understand how many there actually are, and they don't know when they're using different tenses, like most grammar, to be honest. But
Yeah.
with the tenses, I think there are four tenses which are like that make up 80% of the English language. So like if you look at the actual sentences that are used, like 80% of them are like four of them. I think it's like the present simple, present continuous, the past simple, maybe the future simple, but I don't think it is the future simple, but I don't know. I'll link them in the post. But if you really focus on them and nail them, then you've got 80% of your sentences grammatically correct. In terms of like actually learning them, it's really boring, but it's really difficult because the exercises you do are really unnatural to actually speaking. So I've
Yeah.
done tense work with a lot of students, and there are some really good YouTube videos, to be honest, like on this, and I'll probably link a few in the post. But find some videos of like people that explain it well. I wouldn't be able to do that because I suck at teaching grammar, to be honest, because I just find it really boring. But find some people that do it well, keep watching it, look at the sentences, and just like keep doing exercises and practicing yourself. Like create your own sentences with the grammar that you're familiar with in those tenses. But like, I don't know, like with the each tense, there are so many different reasons why you would use it. Like the present continuous is like maybe an easy one because it's like something that you're currently doing right now. So right now I am speaking, and that's why we use ing. Like I'm doing it right now. But like it's difficult because I could say like at the moment I'm reading this book, but I am reading this book, but I'm not doing it right now. So it is quite confusing, the tenses. So make sure that you know all the use cases and try and just create as many sentences as possible and understand why you're doing it. It's very debated of how useful the exercises are. I think it's good to have like a basic grasp and understanding of it, but I think if you just focus way too much on exercises, then I don't think you'll really grow that much because when you're speaking, like when I speak, I don't think about what tense I'm going to use. I just speak naturally. And people think that learning a second language is different from learning your first language. But I think like a lot of people are starting to say that it's basically the same, but it's just about like just absorbing more input through reading and listening, and you'll eventually like pick up on it. I think with feedback, it's pretty useful. If you keep saying the wrong things or keep making a mistake, then you won't learn and you won't adapt and you won't kind of correct those mistakes. Like just increasing your input, reading more and listening more is as good as doing exercises because it's so hard to take that knowledge from the YouTube video and the tutorial and the presentation in the class and the exercises and apply it to a conversation. And you can when you're like practicing. So like if you're in the speaking club or if you're in one of our group calls and like you want to think, oh, which tense do I use now? That's fine. And it's fine in a normal conversation as well, but it slows everything down and it makes things less natural. So it's fine making a mistake, but I'd try and seek feedback somehow. And I think writing is probably a really good way to do it because it's quite easy to get feedback on your writing because writing is like the slower version of speaking. You just have more time to think about it. And I think if you can write well without making too many mistakes with your tenses, eventually you'll be able to speak well as well. So you can use ChatGPT and Grammarly and other things to get feedback on your writing and your tenses. Just literally write an essay on something or kind of like, use the weekly workbook and use those topics and write something depending on the questions that I provide. And then just plug it into ChatGPT and say, are there any grammar mistakes in here or have I made any mistakes in my tenses? And it will say yes. And if you realize, oh, I keep making a mistake with the present perfect, then watch some more videos in the present perfect, do some more exercises with the present perfect, and just continue with the input and the output. And eventually your brain will just kind of recognize the pattern a little bit better. But yeah. English, it's not like the other like Romance languages, I think they're called, or Latin-based languages. English is part Latin, but it's going to be way easier to learn English than some of the other languages, and just because it's closer to Spanish, but also because there's so much content online in English. Like if you like YouTube, there is so much content on absolutely anything that you enjoy in English, and so much music, so many films, so many TV series. People give up on languages not because they don't have the mental capacity or they're not smart enough. I'd say like 99% of people who are like high school educated could study and learn English as a second language if they really wanted to. The thing is, it's about like the reason why you're doing it. Like if the reason why you're doing it is not like a particularly strong one, then you won't have the motivation to start and you won't have the discipline to do it full stop. But if if you have a big enough reason why you want to do it, and if you do have some type of emotional resilience, because learning a language isn't easy. English is easier than other languages. Like if I wanted to study Ukrainian, for example, I would be able to find TV shows in Ukrainian and I could listen to Ukrainian vloggers and watch like videos in Ukrainian, but like the amount of content online for actually things that really excite you will be so much smaller than in English. So like with language learning, it's about like being consistent, making it fun so it's easier to be disciplined. And with English, like you can really just like focus. So that's what I try to do in the community. I try not to make it too much about language learning because then it makes it some people like language learning as like a topic. Like they love learning about linguistics and things like this. Personally, I'm not that into it, but like language learning and teaching English gives me the ability to do something which I do love, which is like having interesting conversations and like talking about things that I'm interested. Like I like doing learning and talking about those things. So that's why I like teaching English. If you're learning English, then like focusing on things that you actually enjoy is just like makes it so much easier. Like if you love Formula One, just watch Formula One videos in English and you will like pick up on it so much quicker than just like forcing yourself to do really boring things. And in terms of like why learn English, I think it depends on the person. Like it depends what they're motivated by. If they're more of a cultural person or they love films or books or something, it just opens doors. Like all languages open doors, but English opens the biggest door because it's like the internationally spoken language. So it depends who you're speaking to. If someone's career orientated, then tell them they'll probably earn more money if they speak English and they'll have better job opportunities because that technically is true. So depends who they are, but there are plenty of reasons why to learn English, but you don't need to. Like I think I think it's probably quite important for people to understand the basics. If you go on holiday, because if I go to France, if a if a German person goes to France and they don't know French, and the French person doesn't know German, they'll speak English to each other. So, and that happens all the time. So, I think it's pretty important to have like a basic level of English. It'll make your life a hell of a lot easier if you go to a different country. But you don't like. I don't think it's really that necessary. It's not like learning to read, for example, in your native language. It's not like a complete necessity, but it depends how focused you are on your career and business. And if you are interested in your career, then it will help you a lot to learn English to a good level. Some people say that you should not speak for a while and you should just like concentrate on reading and listening for as long as possible because then you don't get into habits of making mistakes, which are harder to undo. So some people say this, and then some people say you should speak from day one. And I think it probably depends on the person, but I don't have any strong opinions on this. But in terms of grammar, I'd probably learn grammar while you're speaking. I think focusing on grammar as a beginner is probably not that good of an idea. Just like try and understand some basic sentence structure, and I guess basic grammar could be useful, but not like anything too complex. And just learn kind of more vocabulary, and you just try and read and listen to as much as possible that's your level. But yeah, not too much grammar to begin with, not any complex grammar anyway. There are lots of words in my passive vocabulary. So if I read a book, I could read many words, hundreds, thousands of different words, and I could understand majority of them. However, there might be four or five in there which I understand. I kind of understand in context. If someone says it to me, I can give a definition, but I don't potentially use it in conversation or when I'm speaking. This will be the same for you when you're speaking in English, probably like at a more extreme level. Like there will be so many words in your passive vocabulary that you can understand, especially when reading. It's more difficult when listening because there's speed included and there's also accent included. But when you're reading, you might understand quite a lot. But like the language that you are able to read compared to the language that you are able to speak probably has quite a big gap. And that might frustrate you, understandably, and that is quite an annoying feature of learning a language. Now, when it comes to learning new words, I think there are a few ways to do it. Some people really like flashcards, and some people learn like lists. So they might have like a list of B2 level words, and they'll go through all these words and kind of like, okay, I don't know this word, let's add it to a flashcard and use it. But you're learning that out of context. And I think context and making connections between these words are really important. So there is a verb to yawn. So when you're tired, you kind of open your mouth to show that you're tired. If you learn the word yawn and you're kind of it's in your flashcards and you are just repeatedly kind of choosing, okay, yawn, yes, it means to like make this mouth movement. It's decontextualized, and if you connect it with lots of different words, then it's easier to remember. So imagine you learn the word yawn. You could write it down somewhere or on your computer and write down some connected words, sleepy, tired, bored, for example. Then you could practice creating some personalized sentences with this word. And I think this is the kind of the important thing is start practicing using the words that you want to use in your active vocabulary. Practice using them at home. So make 5 sentences with the word yawn in a way that you would actually use them. So there's no point learning and focusing too much on adding words to your active vocabulary that you don't need to use. So, for example, there will be specific words which you think, I'm never going to say that, so what's the point? Just focus on words which you think are really useful, that you would like to use, that you hear people using, and you think, okay, that's a good word. I would like to use that. And just practice speaking out loud, like using that word. So you can have a flashcard kind of practice where you do like daily use or every other day or a few times a week where you go through these flashcards and try to remember the definitions, but always put them in context and always try to make as many sentences as you can. It's obviously a lot quicker to say them out loud. So you can say 3 sentences with the word yawn in a lot quicker than you can with writing. But if you're writing them, it's kind of there forever. And you might have a nice notebook with all these new words that you're learning and you can see them in context. And the more times that you actually use this word, the more likely your brain's going to be able to remember it in the actual moment of speaking. So when it comes to you telling a story and you're describing some time that you were really sleepy and bored, and you're thinking, okay, like I want to tell people I was yawning. If you haven't used that word in, you may have never even said that word in your life. Your brain is probably not going to remember in that quick moment of finding that word yawn. But if you are um, practicing creating sentences a lot, then your brain will remember that word quite quickly. I'm sure like that you can think about it in your own languages and in English, especially in a second language, actually. So kind of the advice is to have a practice or like a routine or some kind of exercises that you do on a frequent basis with words that you learn. When it comes to choosing what words, a good rule is like if you see the word 2 or 3 times, then maybe think about adding it into kind of your flashcards or your kind of exercises, because sometimes you might see a word once and you might never see that word again. And yeah. And what's the point of learning it if you're never going to really come across it again? I have a student who just does vocabulary work with me, who is really good at English. His English is excellent, He reads a lot outside of our lessons, and he comes to me with all the words that he's kind of looked up on his Kindle, and we go through them, and we have this system of like checking if these words are useful. Like 50% of the words I don't even know, so we just remove them because he's like, if Sam doesn't know this, who has probably a bigger vocabulary than most native English speakers, not trying to boast, but it's probably a little bit higher than average, just because I read a lot. But that's like, what's the point of him learning that word if I don't know that word? Because I don't need it and I get along fine in English. So he's not going to need it. So why waste the time kind of practicing those words? So if you see a word two or three times, then that's a good indication that it could be a useful word. Also, related to things like your hobbies, maybe learn the vocabulary around them because you're more likely to learn them, and just be kind of ruthless or be very specific with these words. Don't try and learn 50 new words a day because you won't. In the recent workbook, I put like 30 new vocabulary words. Some people, if they read that, they may not know any of those words and they might be a little bit overwhelmed by kind of, okay, well, there's 30 new words here. What do I do? If you've got a lot of free time, then you can learn a lot of new words if you're willing to put the hours into kind of doing those exercises of kind of those flashcards, creating sentences with them, and also reading and listening to them a lot. Because the more that you like see a word or hear a word in different contexts, then you get a much better understanding of that word. So if you hear the word like giant, you may think of that big mystical creature who is like a really big person. But then someone might say there was a giant collision on the road between two cars. You're like, okay, well, they're not talking about a big person there. They're talking about a big crash between cars. Or I might be describing a person as giant. Oh, my friend, he plays rugby, he's a giant. Well, I don't actually have a friend who is a mystical creature who is a giant, but he's just very tall. Like, there are three different use cases of the word giant, and the more that you kind of listen and read, the more you understand this word. So when it comes to learning vocabulary, just kind of set yourself a very small goal of kind of practicing 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day and kind of trying to set a goal of learning, even if it's just one word a day, being consistent with that vocabulary. Or maybe it's better to kind of go over a week frame, like saying, okay, 10 new words a week into my flashcards or to my exercises. Once you start feeling comfortable using that word and you know that word and it's in your active vocabulary, then you don't need to do exercises with it. Like, it gets pushed out of the system of the words that you're practicing using. So it's constantly moving, like changing like a river. Like, some words go down the river and you don't need to use them. New words come in. So to get back to my point, it's better to be consistent and slow and kind. If you're just consistent with it over time, it's going to be a lot better than thinking and panicking and going, oh, my English is really bad and I don't know enough vocabulary, and being mean to yourself, and then thinking, okay, I'm going to learn 50 new words this week. Okay, you may write down 50 new words 1 week, but are you going to do it the next week? Probably not. And then you're just going to think, this English is too much for me. So it's better to have like a goal of practicing writing sentence with words that you want to add into your active vocabulary, and just practicing with them slowly and just trying to do it frequently. If you have a lower level of English, some translation is always going to happen, especially for finding new words. I had a Spanish lesson with Jose yesterday, and I was translating basically everything that I wanted to say because my Spanish is not good. And that's normal, that's expected. That's how you understand some words and a lot of words. And it's okay. Like, if you do forget a word in English, or kind of you want to try and think about something like, if you forget one or two words and you have it in your mind in your native language, it's not a problem just like to kind of like just think about what that direct translation is, and go for that. It's fine. It does slow down the conversation, which can be a problem, because if you when we talk about anxiety and confidence in a minute, this kind of connects to it. But as soon as you kind of stop your attention on the other person, on what the other person is saying, and you go inwards and you're focusing on what your thoughts, then you stop listening to the other person. Then you kind of miss what they're saying. Then you might have to ask them to repeat. And then this spiral happens where you're thinking, God, I'm bad at English. I'm not understanding them. And then this whole kind of thing happens. This may sound stupid, but just try not to do it. Like if you allow yourself to translate first, you're going to translate first. If you're saying, I'm not going to translate first, then like in your brain, it's like an active decision. So just say to yourself, I'm not going to do it. That I don't know if that's going to resonate with people or that's just really stupid. That's like someone saying, oh, I'm worried about this. Well, don't worry about it. It's not that easy most of the time. But yeah, just don't allow yourself to translate if you find yourself doing it, or kind of just test yourself, ease yourself in. Like, okay, when I'm answering this question, I'm not going to translate first. Just be like soft, be gentle, start easy. When it comes to translating as well, I think like regular practice is probably really important. I've taught students for quite a long time one-on-one. You can tell when a student is consistent when you see them once or twice a week, or if they speak English at work or every day, their English brain is well oiled. Like when you ask them a question, it kind of works quite quickly. Like they're not having to translate. It doesn't take them a while. It's like an old computer or a car. Like if you haven't used it in a long time, it's going to be really slow and rusty, and it's going to take a while for things to work. And if I haven't seen a student for a month and they've been on holiday to somewhere where they didn't speak English, for example, and they haven't spoken in a month, the start of that call and the end of that call will be very different because they're just rusty and they're not used to speaking in English. So, as with many things and many problems, it's just a matter of practicing more. I think reading more and even just listening more can be really useful because those kind of you have like a variety of words which have been that you've processed recently. So like practicing more, it's a quite basic and quite simple advice, but practicing more and reading more and listening more does help and it can be really beneficial. So there are exercises. I will give an explanation of this in a different video. Try not to do it and practice more. I think that's as much advice I can give for translating, but it's not the end of the world translating. Like, it's fine. If you don't like use the language enough, then you kind of just have to ask yourself why and what's stopping you. And it might just not be a priority for you, and that's fine. Like, I'm not gonna get you to quit your, I'm not telling you to quit your job or like stop seeing your friends or your family or stop having fun essentially or stop your hobbies. But like, I'm sure you can find time to use the language. And even if it's not kind of speaking, then there are still kind of ways to do it in terms of watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, watching TV series, watching films. This is like a lazy way to learn English. It's not as nice as watching these things in your native language, obviously, but it's a pretty easy way just to kind of keep that momentum going with learning English. So if you are feeling like tired that week, then you can always just like start a new TV series in English if your English is good enough. Put it with English audio, English subtitles as well. It's a nice way just to like continue to use the language. When it comes to kind of actually practicing, that's more difficult because you may live in a place where people don't speak English that much. You may not know about like online communities like the one that we have. So everyone in this community does have the option now to practice English. Like each week, I give you content to listen to read. You have speaking questions that you can practice speaking at home. You have questions that you can like practice your writing, and you have calls that you can come to practice your speaking. If you live in Europe, if you live in Spain, if you live in France, there will be language kind of exchanges where people meet up and they kind of speak English if you do want to meet people in real life and speak English. And there will be loads of places online and like communities and forums of like things that you're interested in where you can actually practice. You you may need to like find the time to do this. most people are pretty busy. They have jobs, they need to make their own food, they need to clean their house. This is pretty normal. Learning a language is a bit of a luxury for a lot of people. If you do want to improve your English quite significantly, it might mean making some sacrifices of reducing doing something else. Easy one is not going on your phone so much or using that phone to actually learn some English. Like even if it's Duolingo or listening to a podcast, it's still useful. So you may have to kind of stop using something else to find that time to use it, or kind of just creating a habit from it. Like I had the habit of doing Spanish, like a little bit of Spanish every day. And that was while I was stretching, I would just listen to this kind of Spanish audiobook. And I would do a bit of Spanish, even if it was just Duolingo, an English class of Jose, or listening to that audiobook for like 10 minutes a day. And that was just my goal. And I'd do that 70% of the time. But recently I've kind of just like abandoned like my habits or my like habit checking because I've just been focusing on work so much. I just wanted to kind of ignore everything else. So, and guess how much Spanish I've done? None. Literally none. I've been to class with Jose. I was going to cancel my class with Jose yesterday because I was so tired, and I haven't done any this week. I didn't do any last week apart from my class with Jose because I just didn't have that habit in place. So if you are not using the language enough, it might be a case that kind of you need to create a habit. Now, if you do want to create a habit, then I would recommend listening to a man called James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. This guy is like the wizard of habits. It's a really good book. I think it would be pretty good to read in English as well, because I don't think the language is actually too difficult. But if you're into personal development or self-improvement or whatever you want to call it, Atomic Habits is a really good book. He's also kind of been on lots of podcasts before, so you can listen to a podcast and I'm sure you'll get the same information. But basically, just try and pick the same place, the same time. Okay, I'm going to study English at my desk every day at this time for 10 minutes. If you kind of write that down and you do it and you tick it off every day, then you're more likely to do it. So not using the language enough, like with the internet and with access to materials, like you can use English if you want to. Speaking is a little bit more difficult, obviously, but kind of with like tutors are really cheap now. Like if you go on Preply, I'm sure you can find a tutor if you wanted to like speak to someone just like a lot. You can find tutors for like really cheap now. So like if it's just something that you kind of like if you just want to speak more, then you can find tutors for one-on-one, or you can join a community like ours, or try and meet some people in real life. Or like if you and your partner are trying to kind of learn English, you can say, okay, let's like on Tuesdays, let's only speak English to each other, or like try and speak English to each other more. I don't know how successful that is. I've heard people like say that they're going to do that, but I think people like give up on it pretty quickly. So if anyone like listening to this or anyone in this call who does that and has some success of that, I would be interested to hear that because I think we'll probably give up on that pretty quick. I think I've been a bit mean with that one. Like if you're not using the language enough, then just do more. It's quite simple, really. And oh, sorry. This is the important one. Just forget about grammar. Like if you're struggling to use English, just don't do the boring stuff. Just do stuff that you find interesting. Find a podcast or a TV series, or kind of like just engage with the topics or subjects that you actually like. Like if you like football, just watch a football match in English, or watch Match of the Day, which is like a BBC program, and they go through the highlights of the Premier League games in English. Like just do stuff that you enjoy, like that you do in your native language in English. That's way easier and way more interesting than learning grammar. And like that's if you're struggling. Like if you are really taking English seriously, then the grammar is probably important as well. But if it's just getting that momentum going and getting consistency, then forget about the boring stuff, like even vocabulary maybe. Just kind of read and listen to stuff that you like. So lots of people said that they feel anxious or they feel a lack of confidence when they speak English. This is pretty normal, very normal. I remember when I moved to Spain, I was really nervous and anxious about speaking English. I'm going to kind of dissect it and dissect what social anxiety is because I'm pretty well versed in this, as I used to have pretty bad social anxiety myself. I don't really have it that bad anymore, thanks to just years of coping with it and living with it and learning about it and going to therapy and things. But it's a really important issue, and I think that's what's happening when people are they're kind of nervous about speaking English, is that they are suffering from or experiencing social anxiety. Now, like when you are anxious, you are probably going to perform worse at whatever you're doing. So I'm sure everyone can remember a presentations at school or college or university where you needed to present in front of people, or public speaking in general. And everyone can remember those few people who were really, really, really nervous and they just couldn't get those words out, and the whole presentation was awful. I can remember like a few of those from a few years ago, and that's fine. I'm not going to judge them. But those presentations and the quality of the work that they did suffered because they were anxious. Now, that's an extreme case of someone who is like really, really, really anxious. But even with a little bit of anxiety, which is normal, you're probably going to perform worse. And some of these problems that we've mentioned and talked about, when it like forgetting words, especially forgetting words, like this will uh, be made worse or exacerbated by feeling anxious. And then if you are feeling anxious to begin with, you're probably thinking, okay, I'm bad at English or I'm going to make mistakes. And this is like a thought that you're having. Because you're anxious and you're more likely to make mistakes or like forget words when you're anxious, these are just going to reinforce your beliefs and make your beliefs even stronger. And then you're just stuck in this kind of box of like, oh, I'm anxious, so I speak English poorly, and then I make mistakes, then I think, then I add judgment, and then I'm more anxious, and the whole thing gets worse. And then because you are anxious, and feeling anxious is not a nice feeling at all, and if you have these really strong judgments about making mistakes, like if I make a mistake, I'm bad at English, and if I'm bad at English, it means I'm stupid. Like if you are having these thoughts, then you're going to avoid speaking English because you don't want to feel stupid. And then when it comes to speaking English, like when you need to, when you go on holiday or something or at work, that you haven't been practicing because it makes you feel anxious, like you know what trying to get at. Like it's just a spiral and a spiral and a spiral, and you just keep going down in the moment and also kind of like in your life. And this is not just for English, this is for a lot of things. Like people avoid lots of things just from due to anxiety. So what I've said there is feeling anxious is normal. However, it's not a good situation, or like it's not a good mindset or a frame to be in when we are practicing English. Now, what's the point? Like, why? Let's think about why people do feel anxious. When I was speaking Spanish, or when I was doing my master's degree and we had seminars, I was pretty anxious then because I didn't want people to think I was stupid. I wanted to leave a good impression. I wanted people to think that I was intelligent. I wanted people to think I was like clever and funny and charming and kind. And I thought that people would make these judgments about me depending on what I said, even though they don't really know me as a person that well. I know me as a person that well, and I could be some of those things. I also might not be the others, but I was kind of hoping that they would make a positive judgment of me, and I was hoping that they wouldn't make a negative judgment of me. So, what is the anxiety for? Well, it's your body's trying to protect you from something. And what's it trying to protect you from? Well, a worst case scenario. Why would people be scared of speaking English or feel nervous when they're speaking English? Because they may have this kind of situation in their head where they think everyone's going to point and laugh at them, saying like, "Oh, look, Sam's bad at English. Like he's so stupid." That's not going to happen. And if that does happen, then that person is not very nice. And like, why do you even care about that person's opinion to begin with? Like, I am not going to do that in our group calls. So if we focus in on speaking in the group calls and people feeling nervous there, I'm not going to do that. Regardless of how bad someone speaks in English, I am never going to point, laugh, and say, haha, this person's bad at English. And neither is no one else. And if they do, I will message them and say, that is not very nice. Don't do that again. If you do, you'll be removed from the group. Or I'll just remove them from the group to begin with without even messaging them. So that's not the community that I want to have. So that's not going to happen. That's the worst case scenario. Over. The second kind of more realistic one is the negative judgment. If someone kind of speaks and they make a mistake and they haven't expressed themselves very clearly, that happens. I've probably done this in this call, and I speak English at a good level and I'm a native speaker. Does that mean I'm anything? No, it just means what's happened. Like there's no need to add a judgment onto the experience or what's happened. The same with if someone makes a mistake or doesn't express themselves as clearly as they want to. Let's say even if they did, let's say someone speaks and they kind of make a point, doesn't make so much sense, they make a few pronunciation mistakes. That's it. That doesn't mean anything. That just means they made a mistake. There's no need to add a judgment onto that. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they are stupid or they have bad pronunciation. It just, they said what they did and they made a mistake. That's it. But when it comes to like guessing what or like protecting your own image, like why, like I did this all the time. I still do it now. So I'm not judging you for doing this. But if you are fearful of making a mistake because you think people are going to judge you and make a bad judgment of you, why are you making that person mean or nasty or not a very nice person in your head? You don't know what they're thinking. So why are you trying to guess what they would think in response to something that you've said? And why not make it a nice thing? Most of the time, people are just thinking about themselves. They don't really care too much about other people. This is the biggest piece of advice for anyone who drinks a little bit too much alcohol one night and they've done something stupid and they wake up in the morning and they think, God, I was stupid last night, or I shouldn't have said that thing. Do you know what? They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves and all the stupid things that they've done. I've been there. We've all been there probably. If anyone has drank a sip of alcohol or been on a night out, it's happened. So there's no need to make kind of people mean in your head. You don't know what they're like. Like this is a supportive community. Everyone is in the same kind of position as you. Why don't we just all agree to like, if people make a mistake, we're not going to judge you. So just go into interactions like just thinking people aren't going to judge me. And even if they do, that's fine. You're not going to know. That's the thing. You're not going to know unless they literally say, oh, you made a mistake there. And because you made that mistake, you're this. That's not going to happen. They may point out a mistake, but like I said, no need to add a judgment value onto it. Okay, a lot of the times people may feel anxious about something is because they have some beliefs. So I held a belief for basically my whole adult life that I'm not very intelligent or I'm not smart. I didn't do very well in school when I was 16. I did kind of probably okay. I've done a lot better than a lot of people, but I got mostly C's in my things. It was like I passed majority of my exams, but I didn't get like A's and B's. And the school that I went to, which is just a normal school, and a lot of my peers and people that I knew, even people who I thought, okay, I'm more intelligent than this person, did a lot better than me. So I thought from there, oh, I must be stupid. Then I went to college and I didn't do very well in those results either because I kind of wasn't interested in education whatsoever. And I didn't do very well in those exams. I didn't go to university the year that I was supposed to because I had to resit my exams. And I finally got okay grades. Then I went to university, didn't really take it too seriously because I had too many life problems going on. But I was interested in the subject. It was politics, and I got a 2-1, which is like the second best grade you can get. You can get a first, a 2-1, a 2-2, a third, and yeah, a third is a pass. So I got like 60% overall, 60 like 2%. But it was from a bad university. So I was like, oh well, I've got this degree, so whatever. I can speak about politics or whatever. but I've got a degree from a bad university. So I've still got this chip on my shoulder of like me being stupid. Then I go to the University of Manchester, which is like a great university in the UK, to do a master's degree, and I get a distinction grade, which is like the best grade possible, 70%. And I'm like, okay, I just had to spend an extra £10,000 on just proving to myself that I'm not stupid, which I didn't. I know that I'm not stupid. And it's all, and like I was scared in those seminars and fearful in those seminars because I had a belief that I was stupid. Now, everyone that I've spoken to in this group, their English is good. Their English is a lot better than I can speak any other language, and it's all relative to other people. Like your English is a lot of everyone here's English is not as good as mine. Okay, well, I'm English, so I've got an unfair advantage. But I'm sure you can think of a friend or someone that you know, or a parent or a family member who your English is better. You may have even been on a holiday or at work. You may have more responsibilities when it comes to speaking in English, or yeah, when you're on holiday, you have the responsibility of speaking English because your English is better than other people's. It's all relative. Like I could like anyone in this group, there's probably billions of people, literally billions of people in the planet where your English is better. So like if you are in a room and your English is the best, you're probably not going to feel too scared. But if you are constantly comparing yourself to like native speakers or like scared that they're going to judge you because that your English is not good, you probably speak English better than like they do another language, especially English people, like British English or Americans. Like English people do not learn second languages. Most people like it's a very rare occasion if someone can speak like a second language in England. Like it's very rare. It doesn't happen that often. So like it's all about beliefs. So if you believe, oh, I'm bad at English, and you're constantly thinking this and it's constantly reinforcing this by focusing too much on the mistakes and the times that you messed up rather than the times that you were successful, then you are going to feel scared because you're just going to be like scared of like reinforcing this and like proving and it's true like oh I think I'm bad at English, I'm going to go into this call, I'm going to speak about if money makes me happy, and oh I made a mistake, that means my English is bad. You can do that. It's not going to get you anywhere. So our brains, like even though we're quite intelligent creatures, humans, like our brains are pretty adaptable. And if you just like keep telling yourself, I'm good at English, and you just focus on the positives, then you'll just believe that you are good at English, and then you'll be less scared. So yeah, I have written some notes. I'm just going to read through them. Mistakes don't mean judgment. Your English doesn't need to be perfect. My English is not perfect. If I go through this recording, I will have made grammar mistakes. I promise you. I make mistakes all the time. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. I made a video on this recently. It just happens. Your English doesn't need to be perfect. That's the reason why you're here. The main thing is just communicating how you feel, communicating what you think, what your opinion is. If you can get that across and you can engage in a conversation and you can communicate with another human, that's the goal. It's not being perfect. So like just make sure that you think that is the goal. The tips I've written down are change these beliefs, stop being mean to yourself and about other people by thinking they're going to be judgmental. And like on these group calls, like you're safe. Nothing bad's going to happen. So just remind yourself of that before you join one and focus outward. Zoom is horrible. And I learned this during my master's degree because during the first year, it was all online, like the seminars are online. And that was like the first time using Zoom because of the pandemic. And the self view on Zoom is the worst thing ever for people who are anxious because you will just look at yourself. And that doesn't mean you're narcissistic, but you will stop looking and focusing on what other people are saying because you keep looking at yourself. I do this all the time in classes, and I'm like, why am I looking at myself? It's not because I want to look at myself, but people just do it, especially when you're anxious. And then when you are looking at yourself on the camera and you're not listening to what people are saying, you go inside your head, you stop listening, you kind of like you're not focused, the anxiety gets worse. So one tip is focus outward. Don't focus on you, don't focus on your thoughts. Just really try to be present and focus on what other people are saying. hide your self view. I think you can just right click your video and press hide self view. I really recommend doing that and just like focus on the actual conversation. That's like what the group calls are for. They're for having interesting conversations. It's not about you being perfect with your English. It's about having an interesting conversation. And through that, your English will get better. So that's the point. It's not about being perfect. It's just about engaging in useful and interesting ideas, not being mean to yourself, and just kind of having fun. And there's less pressure like on it. At work, it's different because it's important to be a bit more professional sometimes, and people might think like your reputation or your worth is dependent on how well you can speak English, but you need to practice in a safe space, and that's why this community is a good place to practice. This is pretty simple, but the more English you do, the less scary it's going to be. When I have a trial class with a student, I used to be pretty nervous because I've never met this person before, and I cared about their opinion of me, even though they're meeting me for 25 or 50 minutes. Like that even matters. Now, when I have a trial class and I'm meeting a student, I'm not scared or nervous whatsoever. I just turn up and do my job. It's the same with anything. The first time a pilot gets to fly their plane for the first time, they're probably going to be a little bit nervous or scared because it's their first time. All you need is exposure. You just need to do it more often. Just practice like getting yourself out of that comfort zone more, the easier it will become. Like I'm sure some people when they're speaking in these group calls for the first time, they may have been a little bit scared. And now it's probably a little bit easier. I was a little bit nervous or anxious before this call because I've never done a call like this before. But if I do this 50 more times, I'm sure I'll be a lot more relaxed doing it. And then the last thing I will say is a bit of a neuroscience hack, and that is that when they have studied anxiety, there is no like chemical or biological difference between that and feeling excited about something. So if you're really excited about something, you kind of like you're thinking about it a lot, you're kind of like not focusing on what's happening around. Same with anxiety. If you can just reinterpret that as excited, then I think you can just perform a lot better with whatever you're doing. So if you are delivering a presentation, if you just keep saying to yourself, like, I'm not anxious, or like, I'm excited, maybe not saying the word anxious would be good, but if you just say, like, I'm excited to do this presentation or I'm excited for this group call today, if you just keep telling yourself that, that belief might change. Just try and reinterpret that anxiety or nervousness as a fun opportunity to do something. If you are a person who gets anxious or nervous, like there's nothing that you can do overnight which is going to stop it. You could turn up completely drunk. You probably won't be nervous then, but I don't advise that. That's not a good idea. It's not trying to fight the anxiety. It's just trying to like just be kind to yourself and just being okay. I'm nervous. It's okay if I'm nervous, even with all the things that I've just said about how being anxious is not like ideal for speaking English. Like there's no point fighting it because the more that you fight it and the more you think about it, the more anxious you're going to be. And then the more you're going to focus on that anxiety and those negative thoughts rather than actually communicating. So just like accept it, just understand, okay, I'm anxious. Go through some of those things, like remind yourself, I know that I can communicate in English. It's okay if I make mistakes. I don't know this person probably won't judge me. And if they do, they're not a very nice person and I don't really care anyway. Just kind of accept that you are feeling anxious and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Try and do it more often so it becomes less scary. And every time that you do it and nothing bad happens, like even if every time you do it and the worst case scenario doesn't happen, then just remind yourself of that afterwards. Like once your body has calmed down and your mind has calmed down and those thoughts stop racing, then you can say, oh, okay, well, that wasn't too bad. Like nothing bad actually happened there. I may have made a mistake. I may have not expressed myself as clearly as I want to, but I'm safe. I'm okay. Nothing bad has happened. You don't know what that person has thought about you. They may be a really nice person. So they may just think, oh, wow, that person was nice. or wow, his English was great. You don't know. It's pretty important to kind of try and understand what those like beliefs are that you hold. And usually they kind of come up when you are anxious as thoughts for me. Don't know about you, but like when I was doing something that made me anxious, like if I stopped and thought about the thoughts I was having, there may be like sentences or words or kind of like feelings that kept popping up. It really helps to try and be more aware of what those thoughts like and beliefs are that keep coming up. Um, and then you can work on them outside of like speaking to native speakers. You can spend time challenging those beliefs or kind of trying to change those beliefs that you have or proving yourself wrong, which is expensive in my case. I had to go to university and spend thousands of pounds just to prove myself wrong. Hopefully you don't need to do that. But it's okay to be anxious, like it's normal, but it's not ideal.